Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Toilets and Titles. My name is Justin Stevens. We are back with you for another offseason breakdown bonus episode. This one, the Minnesota Vikings. And as usual, we got my man here with us, George Reed. That's at George Reed FF. George, what's happening, my friend?
Not much. Just trying not to break down my body at work every day. That's all.
Yeah, well, you work in construction, so good luck with that. Fortunately, we were able to get one of the best in the business on, especially when it comes to Vikings news. Luke Braun, you know him from a couple of seasons ago. He came on the Vikings Breakdown for us, and that is at Luke Braun at Luke Braun NFL. Luke, you are also with the Locked On Vikings Podcast. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the Locked On Vikings Podcast, and where they can find that, and also appreciate you coming on again.
Yeah, my pleasure. Locked On Vikings, you can find wherever you find your favorite podcasts. There's a Locked On network that covers every major sports team, colleges, all that. So, yeah, you can find the Locked On Vikings podcast Monday through Friday, every day. It's a daily show. You can also find me on Locked On NFL on Tuesdays, Minnesota Football Party Mondays and Thursdays, and on Patreon at patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. So no shortage of content. Whatever you're thinking, whatever question you've got, I've probably answered it somewhere.
And then a couple of these guest spots a week.
Yeah, and a bunch of these random shows, yeah.
All over the place. All right. Well, we appreciate your time, man. I know time is money, but we're going to get to Jordan Addison in just a minute. We know that it is recent news, not a whole lot of news. We're going to get to that in just a moment. We're going to get to the offseason breakdown. We're even going to talk a little bit about the wild card loss to the Giants last season as we bleed into this new season. All right after this, but for right now, please watch the banners across the bottom. All right, Luke, thank you very much for your patience. So here we are. We're going to talk about Jordan Addison. The most recent news that I see on Bleacher Report is like 140 miles an hour in a 55 zone in a Lamborghini. Basically, a 23-year-old with the prospects of getting big money one day, not really being able to handle it quite yet, right? Like just
21-year-old.
21.
Even younger.
Yeah, I was giving him a couple of years there. Yeah, so I mean, he's still a kid, right? I mean, we've been there. 21 years old. It is what it is. We've got to hope that there's no major punishments or anything coming down from the NFL. But I guess my big question is as a Vikings guy, are you concerned at all about this decision making? I mean, they did spend a first-round draft pick, and he's slotted to be the wide receiver just outside of Justin Jefferson on the other side. Is any of this concerning to you in any way, or can we just kind of brush it over and move on?
No, I think as like a fan of a football team, you don't have to like judge a person that much, you know, like your main concern is for his safety first and foremost, and then availability. Is he going to get suspended for this, that kind of thing? The NFL almost never gets involved in this kind of thing unless you were drunk or you had drugs in the car, or a gun in the car, or some other confounding factor, but just a reckless driving charge. The NFL will never do anything about that. So you shouldn't expect like a suspension or anything there. But I think on a more direct, like heart to heart level, chill out. Like, dumb kid got up at 3 a.m. to go test drive his car and got caught going fast on a straightaway in a freeway with nobody else on the road. Like, no, I'm not concerned about his personality via judging him on the one thing that he's been in the news for in the last 3 months. I think that would be fairly naive.
For what it's worth, when I was 17, I had an old Cutlass Classic that I was able to top out at 100 on the.
Why does everyone have this story? What are you people doing? And, like Jordan Addison, if you were listening, don't do that anymore. We all agree that stop doing that.
For sure.
But why is every single person that has weighed in on this being like, who among us hasn't taken their car 140 miles per hour in the middle of the night? When this was definitely the most lucid drivers are sharing the road with you. That's when everybody's at their most aware and alert.
My point, though, is that at 95, I thought I was going to die at 17 years old, and I had to hit 100. I just had to have that feeling and that rush, right? So I get it. I understand. If I had a Lamborghini when I was 17, I wouldn't have made it to 18. So I totally get it, right? I had to throw out the decision-making question. I think, if anything, this is going to be a good lesson for him moving forward. It doesn't say anything for the organization negatively at all either. So I'm trying to address some of the stuff that we're seeing on Twitter right now.
When I was 21, I wanted to be a competitive Magic the Gathering player. We all make mistakes. Okay.
I can honestly say at 17 or even 21, I've never gone over 100 miles an hour in a vehicle in my life. I'm not that guy.
Me either. Although I've never driven a vehicle that can. So.
So let's move on from Jordan Addison. This offseason, big shakeup in the backfield for the Vikings. Dalvin Cook, longtime starter, perennial Pro Bowler out. Looks like Alexander Mattison is going to be taking over his role. He signed an contract extension this offseason. What can we expect from the backfield with Mattison back there as a starter versus what we've seen for years with Dalvin Cook?
Yeah, and even before Cook, it was Peterson. So it's been a really, really long time since the Vikings didn't have like a true bell cow number one guy you can take first round in fantasy kind of guy. So it'll be a little different. Alexander Mattison will be the bell cow. I mean, he fully expects to be, or I shouldn't say bell cow, but he'll be running back one. He'll be the first guy. After him, there's sort of a competition for reps between Ty Chandler and Kene Nwangwu, and then they got DeWayne McBride in the 7th round. Whichever one of those guys you think might be able to sneak in 20% of the reps, maybe sneak in goal line reps or something like that, might be worth a look. If you're asking the fantasy question, the shape of this will be probably drive by drive. If Alexander Mattison starts a drive, it's probably going to be him all the way to the end of that drive or until there's a timeout or quarter break, or, that series, I guess I should say. He'll be there for that series. And then every once in a while in the game, there'll be a Nwangwu series or a Chandler series or a McBride series. And how often those things happen will probably depend on how those guys perform at camp. It's worth noting right now, if they played a game tomorrow, RB2 would be Ty Chandler, RB3 would be Kene Nwangwu, RB4 would be DeWayne McBride, who hasn't actually participated in anything because he had a little injury he was coming off of from his pre-draft process that he's still getting over.
And this doesn't always go to a fantasy type show for these breakdowns, but I'm kind of glad that you took it that direction a little bit because Nwangwu, in my opinion, is more of that receiving down back that's going to be huge for the Vikings in certain situations. So if you're thinking fantasy, yes, we do think that Alexander Mattison is going to be the bell cow. He's going to get most of the majority, but I feel strongly he is going to lose a little bit of that third down back stuff. But also talking fantasy, we've got a few spots left in our Frankenstank listener league, the big league of 96 people.
Jesus,
it's 8 divisions, and I'm hoping to maybe even add a couple more at the Fantasy Football Expo in Canton when we do our live draft. But the reason I'm bringing it up is, you all know my second favorite player in the NFL is Justin Jefferson. I still have this rookie card I'm trying to give away, this rookie Panini Justin Jefferson card, and I'm giving it away along with Uncle Steve's free entry that he's willing to give out to anybody that comments in the comment section. It's been like the last 4 episodes I've done, and nobody has commented in the comment section saying that they want that free entry and they want this Panini card. All of the drafts are online except the one that's live in Canton. So if that's why you're not chiming in, then you can do it from your home. So type it in the comments in the YouTube channel or on Twitter or send me a DM, and I will send you the Justin Jefferson rookie card. We'll get you signed up for the Frankenstank, and we'll have a great time. But since I brought up Justin Jefferson, we've already brought up Jordan Addison. We need to talk a little bit about the rest of this wide receiving core, because you did lose Adam Thielen, and obviously talent-wise, Jordan Addison does bring a lot to the table. Thielen was kind of a shell of himself the end of the season, well, most of the season last season. So is this going to be an ultimate upgrade from what we had in previous years with Adam Thielen? And how often are we going to see KJ Osborne? Because I've been waiting on this guy to have his opportunity in his moment, and then they draft Addison.
Sure. I think he's had his opportunity in his moment. I think he's sort of carved out the role that he's going to have. Yeah, I guess to take that in order, going from Thielen essentially 1-for-1 to Jordan Addison it does a couple things. One, you have this like risk factor of what if Jordan Addison doesn't work out? What if he doesn't get the playbook? Stuff that every rookie who has ever drafted is at risk of, right? You've kind of now exposed yourself to that risk, but you also get younger and faster. And, Thielen, how much more time did he have? And so from the like covering the Vikings perspective, obviously that bodes better for the future, assuming he works out, which is a lot. In terms of Addison and Osborne and how they will split time, look, Justin Jefferson is going to be the focal point of this offense. The world goes through Justin Jefferson. That's why everybody has Justin Jefferson as the 1-1. And I would say the other two guys, by virtue of sharing a field with Justin Jefferson, should be devalued pretty heavily if you're talking fantasy. Talking football, though, Osborne is going to have, I think, he's a bigger guy. And so his role is going to be a little bit more suited to kind of being the blocker. Things like there are certain like run plays and run tags that have the like slot wide receiver come in and have to dig out a nickel or go block a safety or something like that. Here's the thing. Jordan Addison at both Pitt and USC struggled really hard in the blocking game. He's a wiry guy. KJ Osborne's a big beefy dude. So when you're in, say, 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, or 21 with, CJ Ham on the field, that might be Jefferson and KJ Osborne. But when you get 3 wide receivers on the field, and it's all 3 of those guys, like that might make you think, oh, Jordan Addison is wide receiver 3, but he might get more run from 11 personnel than KJ does. He might be higher in the progressions and stuff and be running more of the deep routes. It's just going to be a bit of a different role when you need a little more physicality. Don't put the paper thin wiry guy out there as often. And when you need a little bit more speed, Jordan Addison maybe will be the one running the backside dig or something like that. And so they'll take very distinct roles. I don't think that they're in a true competition for snaps with each other, like 1-for-1 skill wise so much. It's like a training camp, who's better, and then we'll give them more run. It's more, well, what do we need more of today? Is this going to be a small defense and we want to use a little more size? Maybe it's more of a KJ day, or maybe they're a defense that wants to sit in their base package all day to try to counter what we're doing in the run game. Then maybe it's going to be more of an Addison day because you've got your bigger guys on the field and we want to run past you. Having that flexibility is what Kevin O'Connell is looking for. He wants to have both those tools in the bag and be able to deploy them at kind of whatever the defense wants you to do. But when it comes to that, it means that there's going to be days where one guy doesn't show up and there's going to be days where the other guy doesn't show up. And ultimately they're kind of fighting over scraps because it's still going to be Justin Jefferson getting the biggest piece of the pie.
Fair enough.
Oh. So, one of my favorite questions I like to ask the guests when they come on is if you could take 2 players from any team across the NFL. Doesn't matter salary cap implications. Those don't matter. Doesn't matter about what you would have to trade to get the player. You could take any player. Just take them and put them on the Vikings, and they cannot be a quarterback. And okay, after
that makes it harder.
But yeah, it cannot be a quarterback. And I'm gonna add it cannot be Aaron Donald because everybody I have asked this. So we've done like 23 of these teams review so far, and everybody has taken Aaron Donald as well. So I'm going to take Aaron Donald away from you as well. But you could put
and I get to do 2 players
on the Vikings. Yep. What 2 players would you take?
Slam dunk Sauce Gardner off the Jets.
Okay.
The Vikings are in dire straits at cornerback. They have Byron Murphy and then like guys that weren't starters last year. Some of those are second year dudes, and maybe the Vikings are expecting a leap. And that's sort of been the narrative is, wait till you guys see what we're going to get out of a Caleb Evans and Andrew Booth and Lewis Seen and all these guys in the secondary. That's what they've been telling us. Of course, we do have to kind of wait and see before, for me, I'll believe it when I see it. Right. But right now it is a very weak room, and it is also a very thin room. Like one injury to Byron Murphy, and it is suddenly getting very dire. And we're like 2 injuries away from trotting out guys that wouldn't make other teams, rough spot at the corner group. So we need corners real bad. If I could get Sauce Gardner, and I'm going to double dip and get Patrick Surtain as well. Let me just get 2 of the best corners in the league, slam them right into the Vikings, and then see how that rotation plays out.
So the reason I like asking that question, because it gives me a little insight on what, in your opinion, is the biggest hole on the team. So by answering,
it's corner, and it's not close.
Yeah. Okay. And that's why I asked, because it gives an insight without directly asking what's the biggest hole in the team. You answer it by saying, I'm going to take this player and this player. So I appreciate the insight on why you were taking those players as well.
So speaking of cornerbacks, and we've already mentioned Jordan Addison, so let's throw him out of this. I'm not talking about him. Rookies report to camp on Sunday. This coming Sunday, Rookies are supposed to report to camp. After the Jordan Addison draft pick, they drafted 2 cornerbacks with the 3rd and 4th round pick. The Vikings did. Of these rookies, including those cornerbacks or any other rookies, who are you most excited to see in camp, and like to see what they have to bring to the table?
Of all the rookies?
Other than Jordan Addison?
It probably D-Way McBride, honestly. I was super excited about him. Yeah, 7th round pick, I know. But I was super excited about him when I came to look at him. I thought, man, I can't believe we got this guy in the 7th round. He's absolutely phenomenal in pass protection, which is such an underrated thing that running backs are evaluated on. Can you be useful in the passing game? Now, he didn't catch like any passes at UAB. Like literally he caught like 4 passes in all of college, which is like a huge concern, right? But I think part of that was he was so good at blocking, they always had him do that. And then the other part of it was that they had quarterbacks that could never get to the check down. He would get like a flip to the side every once in a while, but mostly he blocked, and that's okay. Like pass pro as a running back is a really important skill, and he's awesome at it, and he's awesome at forcing missed tackles. I'm really excited to see what he can do. I probably should mention that Mekhi Blackman has started to work in with the ones as a nickel, which is interesting. That is not something that I saw coming for him. He was probably the single draft pick that I liked the least, and it seems like he's the one that's coming along the fastest, so I might have to take an L there. But I'd be happy to do that because that means the guy's working out.
So you touched a little bit earlier about 12 personnel lining up with 2 tight ends. Let's talk about TJ Hawkinson. Like he is, as far as a fantasy purpose goes, like for me, he's my favorite tight end this year to draft. Looking at the impact,
best value, yeah.
Yeah, looking at the impact he had on the Vikings last year, 59 catches in 10 games, 85 targets. He only had 3 touchdowns, which is fine. What can we expect from him for a full season where he gets to build up a little bit more rapport with Kirk Cousins and actually gets a whole year in this system?
I think of all of the people that, when you see the Vikings drafted a receiver in the 1st round, I think that affects TJ Hawkinson the most. He was wide receiver 2 when he came last year, which is like, why is the tight end your wide receiver 2? This is an issue, and hence they go draft a receiver in the 1st round. But he was second in the progressions. He was running deep routes. He had, I think, like the 3rd highest depth of target of all tight ends last year, which includes some of the stuff he did with the Lions, which obviously doesn't project forward as cleanly. But yeah, he is a deep route runner that can run deep routes. And that is so valuable to have somebody that can do that and can at least be okay as a blocker. But the other tight end, I have been talking about a ton on Locked On Vikings, Josh Oliver, and what that means for the Vikings run game. Now, if you want to explain away the Vikings last year, which a lot of people are very confused, they were 13-4, but also they were kind of not that good. Like, what's the deal? They didn't have a run game. And while they could clutch out a bunch of games in the 4th quarter, they also couldn't put anybody away. Tons of teams came back on them because when they got a lead, all they could ever do is press. They could not actually, if they tried to run the ball and put the game away, it would fail and the other team would get lots of opportunities. And then if they tried to press, well, that's also going to give the other team a lot of opportunities. So they're trying to fix their run game. They're moving to a lot of Kyle Shanahan stuff. And the reason I bring that up to answer a TJ Hawkinson question is the Kyle Shanahan parts of the playbook that they're looking like they're going to steal also put TJ Hawkinson in the George Kittle role. So think about TJ Hawkinson having the role and usage that George Kittle has in San Francisco, and how will he do with that? I think will give you a decent idea of how to project him forward for the season. But I think you should be really excited about, especially the volume that he's going to get and the usage that he's going to get. This is not your Jason Witten catching 4-yard stick routes PPR kind of guy. This is going to be a dude running real routes, and that's really valuable to have in a tight end. I can't believe the Lions let him go.
So I want to backpedal just a little bit. I want to go back to the end of the season, last season. So it was obviously a disappointing wild card matchup, and I don't want to like bring up old bad memories, but I go there to kind of show what the Vikings need to do to improve to get to that next level, to be able to move on to the divisional round or the NFC Championship match. Last season, the Vikings defense wasn't all that great, it seemed, especially at the end of the season.
Awful. Yeah.
At the end of the season, especially. And then heading into the 2023 season, and I hope I'm not bringing up a competitor in any way, but VikingsTerritory.com had rated them as the third worst defense going into the 2023 season. So the reason I'm bringing all this up, what do they need to do to be able to fix that defense? I know you already mentioned the defensive backs, and maybe not what do they need to do, because you have already talked about that. What have they done other than the draft to try to help bolster that defense a little bit?
Yeah, I think what they need is to be right about some of those second-year guys stepping forward and being better than they were last year, which we can't hang our hats on at all, but that's what the team seems to think. They changed everything schematically. Last year with Ed Donatel, Vic Fangio stuff, it was very soft, soft and soft on purpose, right? In some ways, soft not on purpose. But it was very, back off, prevent the deep play. Everybody's playing deep zones, and then hope that forces them to check down and we rally and tackle, right? The way the teams have been playing defense forever in zone defenses since World War II. That's a philosophy of the Fangio thing. Another philosophy of it was the illusion of complexity. You would hear Kevin O'Connell and Ed Donatel talk about that all the time, where they would line up in the same alignment on every play, and then they would rotate that to different coverages to try to make it hard for the quarterback to read what you're going to be in. But then they just didn't rotate to those different coverages. They just sort of ran the same thing over and over again, and teams figured out that they could run the same routes over and over and just spam that and beat them. It was really, really bad. And they miscommunicated a lot. They were clearly poorly taught and poorly installed. So Vikings got rid of Donatel. They got rid of their inside linebackers coach. They got rid of a whole bunch of stuff. But they also lose guys like Eric Kendricks, who still has plenty in the tank. He was just kind of trapped in this weird system that had him doing the impossible every play. They lost Dalvin Tomlinson. They completely changed their cornerback room, which, hey, it wasn't a good cornerback room, but a lot of the replacements are guys that weren't starting in that cornerback room, like a Caleb Evans and maybe Andrew Booth. Like those guys just weren't earning jobs over like Duke Shelley. So roster wise, I would say that it's really hard to say that they're like materially better and be hopeful, but schematically, one of the things about Donatel was he never blitzed. He always would do 4-man pressures, and he would try to do twists and stunts and games and ways to find pressure with 4. And essentially he wanted to kind of keep the coverage tight and give that 4 time to get home, and it never worked. Brian Flores could not be further from that. He's going to blitz 60% of the time. And that is part of in 2019, when he took over the Dolphins in the year that we now know, actively trying to tank. There was like a no talent principle. It takes no talent. TNT is what he would say is, hey, look, takes no talent to work hard. Takes no talent to, be assignment sound, to know what you're looking at. And I think that is part of why he was able to actually get something out of those defenses. So this is truly a guy with a reputation for getting at least something defensively. Be top 20. Like, we don't need you to be elite. Get something defensively out of a bunch of guys that are sort of unproven. Brian Asamoah, what are we going to get from Lewis Seen, Josh Metellus, who's going to be playing a lot of 3 safety, but it's basically, hey, I don't care what your PFF grade on this guy is. He's going to come blitz the B gap. And there's 7 of them. What are you going to do about it? And so it's putting the onus on the other team. If they can counter blitzes, it's going to get ugly. But if they can't, it's going to get ugly in a good way.
So as a Dolphins fan, I could say a lot about Brian Flores. He was an absolute genius as far as coaching defensive side of the ball. I know personally, I believe some coaches are just They're not made to be head coaches. They can flourish at defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, whatnot. And I truly believe Brian Flores is a top defensive coordinator in the NFL. So yeah, you will definitely see a vast improvement on the defensive side of the ball with him as the defensive coordinator. So that was a great pickup for you guys. I forgot that he was even with Minnesota. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm looking over the strength of the schedule. I'm looking at Sharp Football Analysis. They have Minnesota Vikings as the 25th most difficult schedule on the season.
Really?
What is your what is your opinion on the Vikings schedule?
It's funny. I think if you ask Vikings fans, they'd be shocked by that. I think strength of schedule is ultimately a pretty bunk thing. Like, we have no idea who's good and who isn't, right? You get a first place schedule, you play all the teams that won the division. And as we all know about the NFL, all the same teams win the division every single year. That's always the same and it never changes. Like, who gets the hard teams and who doesn't get the hard teams is really hard to predict, right? If it were easy to predict, Vegas wouldn't make any money. So I always think that kind of thing is fairly irrelevant. We play who we play. We can't do anything about it anyways. Tampa's up next. We'll focus on them. And then when it's time for week 2, it's time for week 2. But if you ask other Vikings fans, I think you get a lot about it's a first place schedule. They have this stretch of the Chiefs, and then they have to play the Eagles, and they have to play the Bengals, where everybody else in the division gets like the Steelers and the Browns. We get the Bengals. So there's some tough stuff out there. I think probably that strength of schedule being low is driven by being in the NFC North. We have the Bears, and I think a lot of the futures on the Packers are really low, so they probably don't count very high. And even the division favorite Lions are division favorites, but their over-under is like 9.5 games. So it's a weak division. You get to play six games in that. So we'll see if all of that plays out the way that it's projected to. But spoiler alert, it never plays out the way it's projected to. Sports wouldn't be fun if they did.
This is true. This is very, very true.
So I've got one last question. My question is about the offensive line. So they were actually pretty darn good last season, especially going into this season. They're now projected to be the 7th best offensive line going into 2023. And that's according to Sports Illustrated. But do they basically have the same front 5? Or did they make
9
we should know about? So
the whole room, the depth all the way down. Same exact group of people.
Nice. That's unreal. That's unheard of in the NFL. So
and surprising to Vikings fans who, I mean, when you watch that playoff game and what Dexter Lawrence did to the Vikings and against the Giants, to Ezra Cleveland, who had a nightmare day, Garrett Bradbury, who had a nightmare day, and just sort of running those guys back. And they didn't have to do that. Like, Garrett Bradbury was a free agent. They signed him to a 3-year deal. So they were clearly a little happier about that. And I think some of the stuff that they're doing, again, going back to Josh Oliver, some of the stuff that they're doing with bigger personnel, hopefully will allow the offensive linemen to be in double teams more often, which is a way of protecting them. So I think that that's probably their deal is, hey, we can get away with these guys. We just have to sort of retool things a little bit so that they're a little better protected and we're not asking quite as much of them. That's probably the deal. But yeah, even go back, Austin Schlottman, backup center, Chris Reed, who actually got in a little bit when Schlottman went down, Oli Udoh, Vidarian Lowe, all of those guys are back, including the starting 5. The only question mark is Brian O'Neill, who is who partially tore his Achilles, I think is what it was, in week 17 last year. So he's still kind of recent coming off that. Probably won't see him for any of camp or preseason, and it's still sort of fuzzy if he's going to be ready for week 1 or not. So that is going to be, right now, it's a competition between Oli Udoh and Vidarian Lowe at right tackle, and they're moving Blake Brandel, who filled in for him last year. They're cross-training him to be a backup guard, which they are definitely short on backup guards. So that makes, and they got too many tackles, so that makes sense for them to do.
Excellent. Well, congratulations to Vikings fans, because that's not something that a lot of teams can be excited about. But real quick, George does have one last question. But before we get to that, I want to remind everybody, joinrival.com/titletribe. If you go to that website, you type in that link right there in your URL, your first deposit of up to $200 is going to be matched, and they give you an additional $25 just for using that link. So in theory, if you deposit $200, not even in theory, this is legit. If you deposit $200, you're going to end up with $425 to bet on the newest evolution of fantasy sports betting. It's absolutely amazing. It's phenomenal, guys. We have a weekly show revolved just around Rival Fantasy called Friendly Fire. Make sure you check it out on youtube.com/toilets and titles. George, what's your final question, my man?
So it's a two-part question. What would need to go right for the Vikings this year for you to consider it a successful season? And at the end of the year, what do you predict the Vikings record would be?
I always hate record predictions for the reasons I kind of said before. Same reason strength of schedule is bunk. It's like, we don't know, man. And that's what's fun about it. But Vegas over under 8.5 wins. That seems pretty appropriate. They seem like a team that probably should be regarded as a team in the middle. They were 13-4. Everybody understands that, pays any attention that they weren't the same kind of 13-4 that say the Bills were or the 49ers were. Everybody knows that was an overachievement, and that's okay. That was still fun. And the roster got a little worse. So sure. Yeah. Middle of the pack seems fine. I'll give it 9 wins and say that still wins the division because the NFC North is a trash fire this year.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I think that's all we have. Luke, one last time, tell the people where they can see you, where they can find your work, because I can't keep up with it because it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can find me everywhere. Just your favorite podcasting platform, YouTube or whatever, just search out Locked On Vikings. You'll find me there. And you can also find me at patreon.com/Luke Braun NFL, where you can find the history doc if you want to watch a 7-part history doc on the Minnesota Vikings that I made last year. You can find that there. You can also, that's 7 hours total of Minnesota Vikings history content. We go in depth on just about everything you can think of. You can also find film breakdowns, draft breakdowns, and other random music and stuff there. That's kind of my personal page.
Wonderful. Yep. So this was a lot of fun. Luke, we appreciate your time. George, you guys have a great night. And I guess on the way out, aren't we supposed to like yell Skol or something?
You know, whatever you want.
Have a great night.